providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Hey, good morning, good evening, good night, good afternoon, wherever you are watching this show. Success is a Choice podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Becklin. We appreciate everybody who's jumped on here to watch the live version, whether it's on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. We're going to be talking with a very special guest today about a very array of topics, but all mental, all psychology, all things that we deal with. But our guest today, Dr. Chloe Carmichael. Dr. Carmichael she got Ivy League education at Columbia University in psychology, graduated with honors. She then got a doctorate degree at Long Island University. She's a USA Today best-selling author. She's written a couple books. Nervous Energy is her most recent one. Her previous book was Dr. Chloe's 10 Commandments of Dating. And we're going to be talking to her on a lot of topics. But Dr. Chloe, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It's great to be with you.
Well, I appreciate it. And we hate to date our podcast. We like to have it be evergreen or whatever, but I'm a little nervous. Okay, I'm going to admit it up front. I'm a little nervous because today is one of those dreaded days. If you're listening to this on a day that's not February 14th, sorry, you'll just have to bear with us. But today is February 14th, and this is a dreaded day for some people, and I am no exception. So hypothetically speaking, if you have not done a very good job of planning for Valentine's Day and it just snuck up on you like it does every year, I'm all stressed out. I have all this anxiety, nervousness. What can I do today to eliminate that? Because February 14th is not going away, and my wife celebrates Valentine's Day. That's a problem. So what can I do, or I should say, hypothetically speaking, if that was me?
Well, I hear Chat GPI is pretty good at poetry. I'm just kidding. But well, as a clinical psychologist, I would say that the healthy function of anxiety is to stimulate preparation behaviors. So if you're feeling nervous about, the fact that maybe you haven't prepared, then that anxiety can fuel you to do something like, order some flowers, book a dinner reservation. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's really what's in your heart that counts.
So, but really what you're saying is I should have used this anxiety and this nervousness to actually plan ahead. I should have so I should start today for next year.
Well, you know what? That's actually a great idea. So you can totally book, flowers and things like that way in advance. But it's also not too late to get that going for today. Like you could totally still get some flowers and a dinner reservation for today, right? Or you could also book it for Saturday, and you could just say, I just thought we don't want to go out to dinner on a Tuesday night, so I decided to book something special for Saturday so we can look forward to it.
Yeah, see, that's where I need help, because I've used a lot of those excuses over the years, 20 plus years of marriage, and I've used a lot of those. So maybe I just need to go back to the first or second year of marriage and use some of those again, those excuses.
Yeah, jewelry is always a good one too. You can run to Jared's, right?
Yeah, but I like that. Hey, not only is it a Tuesday night, but everybody else is going to be booking a reservation. We don't want it to be too crowded. We want it to be very special, maybe intimate. So maybe go on a different night.
Yeah, and if you have kids, you can always also explain that being a school night, it's just more fun to go out on a weekend.
So anxiety, we all have it. And your book, I have it right here, Nervous Energy. harnessing the power of anxiety. We're all anxious, and I like to think I'm a really good worrier. And the reason I think I'm a really good worrier is about 95% of the things I worry about don't ever happen. So I think that I'm really good since I worry about stuff. That's just magical powers. Stuff doesn't happen, but we're all anxious about something. We all get stressed out. We all worry. I take it you wrote this book so that we don't have to be unhealthy with our anxiety.
Yes, although I just have to say what you just described there. There is a psychology term for it. It's called defensive pessimism. Have you heard about that before?
No, I have not.
Okay,
I
so,
do not. I do not have an Ivy League education.
well, I mean, I think it's probably maybe also from having a psychology degree. I don't think you have to go to an Ivy League school, but
I was a communication major. We just talk. We just talk about our feelings, but we don't know why we have those feelings. We just sit in a circle and share a lot.
see, and I need the communications people because I have like all these deep thoughts, but I don't know how to get them out there to anybody unless like a communications person will put me on the air. So I need you. But defensive pessimism, I think I talk about it in my book, but it's also it's what you just described, where we do actually worry about negative future outcomes. And to a certain degree, there's actually a benefit to defensive pessimism because, as the name implies, it serves as a defense against just being caught totally flat footed about negative outcomes. It can stimulate us to prepare for them. So, on a certain level, you're right, worrying about things does prevent them from coming true, not magically because of the worrying, but because it stimulates us to take actions.
Well, I said that almost sarcastically, but I love that defensive pessimism. That there's actually a term for it, but
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes I like to say that sarcastically because we do worry about things way too much, and most of the time we don't need to spend. I would think we don't need to spend energy worrying about things because most of the things aren't going to happen at the end of the day.
Well, so there's a balance, right? Some
Okay.
people actually do need to learn how to think about future consequences and, strategize for those things a little bit more. But what my book is about, actually, Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety, it's about working with really high functioning people who are kind of type A people. And what they might have done is almost gotten too good at thinking about, say their defensive pessimism has gone out of control to the point where it's more what psychologists call catastrophic thinking, like where, we just imagine all these awful scenarios. And believe it or not, again, there was probably a point in life where it might have been constructive. So people who are under the age of 25 and their executive lobe is not even fully formed yet, it can actually be helpful for them sometimes to have an iron fist with themselves, like to get yourself out of bed to go to school in college, to just be like, if I don't get out of bed and go to that class, I'm going to get kicked out of school. I'm going to, be a total loser in life, whatever. They have to kind of ramp it up to like get themselves to move out of bed and get to class. But then maybe they're still using that same strategy when they're 35 and it's actually overkill because they have a fully formed executive lobe, or they're having those automatic thoughts that are too negative and becoming demotivating. So we have to find the sweet spot.
Well, a lot of our listeners, a lot of our audience are educators, coaches, people that work with young people, and we hear all a lot about mental health nowadays, which is a good thing that we're drawing attention to that. But a lot of our coaches, a lot of educators, they don't necessarily know what that means or how to reach their young people, that do seem to be stressed out about everything, because when I coached back in the day, hey, it was suck it up, suck it up, just deal with it, be mentally tough, all that kind of stuff. But stress is a real thing, or at least our young people don't handle stressors very well all the time. What kind of advice or what kind of words would you have for our teachers or coaches listening to this?
Well, I mean, I think you're right that there is, as you said, an kind of a destigmatizing of mental health issues, which is good. On the other hand, even as a clinical psychologist, I almost feel like the pendulum has swung so far that we almost want to pathologize or medicalize even just normal human experience, right? So if someone's stressed or nervous because they have a big test coming up, that doesn't mean that they have an anxiety disorder, right? Necessarily. Again, sometimes that means that they should be studying, that they should be working harder, right? I mean, as you said, one of the things that maybe we've gotten away from that's actually helpful is to have an emphasis on self-reliance, resiliency, grit, what psychologists call self-efficacy. All of those things are actually good. Personal responsibility, those are actually empowering skills to be able to teach people. So to answer your question, like what would I say to teachers and educators? I actually present oftentimes to teachers and educators at universities, because they want to learn how to find that balance when they're dealing with a student that's presenting with like this big display of anxiety. Because we have to remember that sometimes people will display distress as a way to try to get others to lower expectations of them, right? To be able to, if I display to you that these requirements are overwhelming, then perhaps you will drop them, right? And so we have to be able to have compassion and lower the requirements if that's really the appropriate thing to do. But we have to be able to have compassion and say, I see that you're super stressed about this. Let me see if we can talk about how you can use that constructively, and to be able to say to someone, did you know that the healthy function of anxiety is to stimulate preparation behaviors? So if you're super nervous about this test, let's talk about it. Like, have you made yourself a study schedule? Have you listed out the 5 topics that you think are most likely to show up on this test? Because Mother Nature kind of gives us this little zing when we're under threat, right? It's that, fight or flight response. We don't have the option to flee from the test. It's going to happen. And there's fight, flight, or freeze. Freezing is not going to be helpful. So that means we have to put that energy into fighting. So offering them action steps and saying, have you done these action steps? That's usually the best way, I think, to help, is to offer someone action steps that they can do. And then if they're not doing the action steps, that's kind of a different issue.
So be prepared. The Boy Scout motto. If anxiety can lead you to be more prepared, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And what we also don't want to do is have stress about stress, right? So coaches and educators can totally normalize it. They can say, you know what, it's totally normal to get, a little nervous right before you're supposed to get on the field or whatever, or going to take a test. I mean, it is go time. And it's good that you have an awareness of that this is a high stakes situation. You're correct about that. But we don't want to waste that energy by chasing our tail and being stressed about stress, when in fact we could point that energy towards preparation behaviors the way Mother Nature intended.
So going back to the Valentine's Day situation or example, if we know that, all right, February 14th, it really didn't sneak up on us. We all have calendars. We all have iPhones. It doesn't sneak up on us. But just that anxiousness of, hey, we don't want to be stressed out again, or I want to make sure that I don't screw up this year. That should lead us to prepare better for next year.
Right. So again, that's why I always tell people, when you have anxiety, it's not always the best answer to just close your eyes and think of a beach, right? Or if you feel bad about yourself that you were unprepared on Valentine's Day, it's not always the best answer to just, give yourself a pep talk and think about how great you are. Sometimes those negative emotions are actually there to guide us and to signal us. So I compare it, for example, to like if a fire alarm is going off, it's unpleasant, but you don't want to just disconnect it and tune it out because it's unpleasant. You want to hear that it is trying to alarm you and put you into motion for your own good. So you actually want to hear that message and allow it to galvanize you and to shape your behavior for next time.
And I like talking also about budget and money, maybe the week leading up to Valentine's Day. That way, when it gets to Valentine's Day, you can essentially say, hey, remember when you were saying we should cut back on? I think a great way to save some money in our family is, let's wait till February 15th and I'll let you go pick out any flowers you want, because they'll be half off. Candy, half off. And that's playing right into the budget issues that you talked about last week, dear. That was a great idea of cutting back on the budget. I appreciate that. I appreciate your input. I want to carry that through. I want to see that into reality. You think that's probably a good idea, or probably not so good? And that might lead us into the marriage counseling part.
Yeah, I don't know. So I mean, like you're seeing a very specific situation, right? So for dating couples,
hypothetically speaking.
Well, because we have to also remember that my other book is Dr. Chloe's 10 Commandments of Dating. And so in dating, there can be dynamics about money and, providing and generosity and all of those things as well that are important and that are kind of symbolized through the gifts and things like that on Valentine's Day. So, I mean, I don't think a lot of people would necessarily respond well to someone saying, I'll let you pick out, like your flowers or whatever the next day. I think most, except for jewelry, right? Some women might want to pick out their own jewelry. I actually sent my husband a link to these earrings. These were my Valentine's Day present. And I was like, I would really like these earrings for Valentine's Day. So you can do that too. I guess that's another thing you could do is like the week before you could say like, I'm starting to, think about Valentine's Day gifts. And I was wondering, is there anything you want, or do you want me to surprise you? Like, you could ask.
Yeah. Well, when I was actually coaching, I had every year I would have an assistant coach or a grad assistant that would pick out the stuff for me, but I don't coach anymore. I'm my own boss. And so, it's tougher. It's tougher on me. And I also had, when I coached women at the college level, I had all these females always giving me ideas and stuff. So that was always better. Now I don't have that anymore. So I've lost.
What I have a resource for you. Okay. So I don't have graduate students assisting me at this point either. I was a college professor as well at one point. But for, your people out there that are looking for resources of just basically assistance, I actually get a lot of really high quality support through the Philippines. So I actually wrote a blog about how I do it. So people, if they want to, they can go to usphjobs.com. And there's like a whole blog of exactly how I source and hire and retain really excellent people that will totally find your Valentine's Day gifts.
We will put that in the show notes. But what I'm hearing right now is, Jamie, I've got an answer for every excuse and everything that you can bring at me. I've got an answer for that.
Well, I have to admit, I'm holding myself back from trying to dig if there is some unconscious resistance, right? Is there some reason like that you don't want to just, what, as you said, I can keep coming up with answers, but I do feel like you keep coming up with pushback. So I can't help but be curious, do you enjoy giving gifts? Is your wife hard to please? Is she unappreciative? Where is the anxiety coming from about these gifts?
Yeah, you know what? We may need to put this on pause so I can go get a couch.
Okay.
I've got my chair right now. Maybe we just need a couch and have a therapy session here. No, I know that this is all hypothetical. We're just trying to help out the audience.
Right.
I'm just anticipating thoughts that they might have. But no, Valentine's Day is fine. That's an acceptable day, unlike Sweetest Day. Sweetest Day, now that's a totally made up Hallmark holiday. Valentine's.
What is that?
I don't even know. We don't.
I've been missing out on gifts for Sweetest Day. Am I supposed to be getting more jewelry?
Yes,
check that out.
You should Google it.
I will. You bet.
Yes, well, we don't celebrate that in our house, but we do celebrate Valentine's Day. I appreciate 10 Commandments. 10 Commandments of dating. Some of us follow the real 10 Commandments that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai. Most of us probably just pick and choose and decide which one we want to follow at different times. Or, hey, I lived a great day today because I didn't murder anybody. What would be the top 1 or 2 commandments we really should hold on to? And then we can buy your book and read the other ones. But the 1 or 2 that we really should grasp onto for 10 Commandments of dating. Yeah.
So one that people really like is Rule 9, control your mind. So in that one, what I do is I explain to people that fantasizing about your crush is not a good idea because it can trick your brain into feeling like you have a closer relationship with them than you do. So for example, a lot of women, because they want the man to pursue them, and so like, well, I'm not going to call him, I'm going to wait for him to call me. But then in the meantime, they're like, in the meanwhile, I'll just sit back and relive that date and, you know, imagine that kiss and all these things. Or, you know, probably guys do some similar, you know, version where they're like, you know, I don't want to call too soon, so I'll just wait 3 days. But in the meantime, I'll just totally think like all about her. The problem is that on a certain level, your brain is perceiving that as time spent with the person. And trust between humans is oftentimes built on frequency and duration of contact. And so if you're fantasizing this frequency and duration of contact, all of which is positive because you're only reliving the best moments, like nobody relives awkward moments usually, then you can totally confuse and trick yourself into over-investing in that person.
Well, I think number 1, if I remember right, was be brief.
Rule 1, briefly done. I came up with rhymes for all of them. Yeah. Rule 1, briefly done.
I like that, briefly done. And I never really thought of that, but just in general, you know, they're whether you're married or single, you know, I imagine that book has something for you. I have not read that yet, but it's on my wish list on Amazon. I'll need to get that.
Yeah, so I want to tell your audience what rule 1 is, briefly done. But also, you're absolutely right that I was so flattered. That was like some of the people in my kind of like business group that are married. They said that they actually felt like the rules were helpful for them in business as well, because the rules are basically about interpersonal boundaries and kind of like pursuit dynamics. So the rule 1, briefly done, is that your first date should really never last more than 90 minutes. Because if it goes way too long, people tend to like, you know, obviously be having a very good time. And so they can get really invested and excited about somebody, but they forget that a big part of a true relationship involves not just having good times together in the moment, but finding out how is the person's follow-up skills. Because we've all had times, myself included, where we're like having an amazing time with someone and we're like, yeah, I'll totally go to that comedy show with you next week. That sounds awesome. And then the next day I'm like, oh, like I don't feel like going out again or whatever, you know. So even if you're having a great time, you should limit those first dates to 90 minutes so that you don't get too far invested. And then you also find out about the person's follow-up skills before you get too invested.
Very good. Very good. So that's Dr. Chloe's 10 Commandments of Dating. We will also put that in the show notes. Go check that out. But it's on Amazon as well. You can get her newest book, Nervous Energy, as well on Amazon. You can get everything on Amazon. So we all, whether it's at Thanksgiving, whether it's Valentine's Day, whether it's just any normal day, we deal with people. And sometimes we deal with challenging people. Mm-hmm. Maybe even toxic people. Hopefully not, but we definitely deal with challenging people. Sometimes we are that challenging person.
Right.
What are some good things that we should be doing when we're working with, interacting with, dealing with a challenging person? Doesn't even have to be toxic, but just a challenging person.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you put that qualifier on it, because I do feel like sometimes there's such a rush for people that they want to label everybody as toxic or, you know, whatever. And I'm like, you know, maybe the person's not even truly toxic. You know, maybe, as you said, they're just challenging, right? And so the way that we would deal with them kind of depends on the situation. So if it's a professional situation and it's like actually really, truly essential that you somehow get along with the person, it's actually more important to get along with them than it is even to necessarily to be authentic. Whereas if it's a personal relationship and like a friendship, it's actually kind of more important to be authentic than it is to get along, because if you being authentic means you guys don't get along, then maybe you shouldn't be friends. But the same thing is not necessarily true in a professional situation, right? So let's suppose that, you know, somebody has an irritating habit, right? And in the professional situation, then you wouldn't just come right out and say, you know, I find that habit like irritating or whatever. You would almost even kind of take ownership of it yourself. You might say, you know what, I am sorry, but like I have this, you know, pet peeve, like it's just me, but like I find that I really need to be able to finish my whole thoughts, before, the other person goes. And like, I just really have this thing on my mind. I need to talk. Or if like the person in the office is like, quote, teasing you, but it actually feels like a little aggressive. Again, you wouldn't necessarily in the office environment say like, you're being a jerk or whatever. You would just, again, say, you know what? I apologize. Like, I'm kind of sensitive. I know everybody has their own way about it, but I'm not so into the teasing. So could I ask you, like, as a favor to just kind of leave me off that tease list, because I'm just not so up for it. And you're kind of almost, you're allowing the person an extremely grateful exit. You're not making them wrong, because the goal is really just to make sure that you can get your needs met and still continue to have a courteous professional working relationship. Whereas in a friendship, if someone is like, or like a family situation like that, annoying aunt or annoying uncle, that keeps saying, like, making jokes about your weight or whatever, you can be a little bit more direct. I still think the stair stepper approach is best, where you start, with like the gentlest way of even just saying, I know you probably mean well, and it's just your way of trying to bond with people. But, for me, I'm just a little sensitive about it. Would you mind if we skip those jokes, right? And if they persist, then I always think it's nice to give them a reminder, just, benefit of the doubt, to say, hey, I just want to remind you, I'm not up for those jokes. But then I always think it's good to have a pivot. So again, you want to try to give them a graceful out. So the beauty of someone who's always, like to the point where you would label them as challenging or toxic, is that at least their behavior is predictable. So if you're going to be seeing that annoying family member who always pesters you about a certain topic, think of 2 or 3 topics that that they would want to talk about that you like too. And then like at the second reminder point or whatever, you can say, but I really would love to hear about like how that new job is going that you mentioned. Like, how's that going? So you're giving them something else to pivot onto, instead of just saying, I told you not to talk about that, and then just like sitting there. Like, you can give them something else to pivot onto. And then like if they really persist, and it's starting to feel kind of malicious, again, this is more in the personal situation. In the professional situation, you might consider going to HR or something. But in the personal situation, you might even just say, I've tried to explain to you that this is just not working for me. I'm wondering if you want to talk about that, the fact that I feel that way, if there's something more we need to discuss, or if it's just really hard for you to respect that, because I feel like we've talked about this several times. And if they continue, you can even just say, if this continues, I'm just going to have to excuse myself when this comes up. And I've even gotten to the point, honestly, where I have had secret signals with my husband at family gatherings, like that if somebody is doing such and such, I tell him in advance, because again, the beauty of these predictably annoying people is that we forewarned is forearmed. So I'm like, babe, if I'm going like this, like it means I need you over here, because sometimes it just like strengthen numbers.
So when you go to these family functions, or you go to any function, people probably know who you are, or they know what you do. Do you find that people are like on guard, or people are a little nervous around you themselves, or they're like, man, I wonder if I wonder if Chloe is trying to get into my head right now, playing head games with me, or does she know what I'm thinking?
It's an interesting question. So it can be a variety of things. Some people want to, they take it as a sign that they should open up and tell me everything about themselves. Like, they take it as an opportunity to just like have a therapy session right there on the spot, and I have to work on setting limits with them. Other people have kind of made jokes that feel like they're real about, gee, are you analyzing me right now or whatever? And I always explain to people that, kind of luckily for me, like the truth is I'm really, the kind of work I do is not about really analyzing unconscious patterns and pulling things out of people that they don't know are there as much. The kind of work I do is where people have a problem or an issue, they're aware of it. Again, I work with higher functioning people. They come, and frankly, I charge so much that they're like, they want to talk fast. They're like, here's the problem. Here's what it is. And can you help me? So I'm like, I don't really like, I don't have the kind of need for cognition. That's another psychology phrase, to the point where I'm actively trying to do work that doesn't need to be done. So like I just explained, like, no, like it's number one, it's not even my clinical style. And number two, it's not my personal style.
Well, for me, I do a lot of work with leadership and teamwork and servant leadership and all these phrases and all these things to build a better team. And then I will say things on my podcast, about that kind of stuff. And then I deal with my wife or I deal with a family member and I'll say something that's not in line with that, or I'll make a mistake, or I'll be selfish about something. And then they're like, but your book said this, or you said this on your podcast, or, you're reminded of it and you kind of beat yourself. Do you beat yourself up over it? Do you ever have things where your husband's like, Chloe, that's not really what you talk about in your books, or that's not what I heard you say the other day, or.
Yeah. So the closest thing that I can think of is like if he has said to me, like, kind of like in like a little argument or whatever, and he'll say like, is that the way that you speak to clients? Like if somebody's talking to you about a problem, do you listen quietly and nicely, or do you just start jumping in and talking about your perspective? And so what I have said back is to just say like, well, you know what, but in my clinical work, I'm working with people that have a diagnosis. And so are you saying like, I need to treat you like a mentally, ill person? Like, I guess like I get like right back into it. I mean, psychologists, we can be the most manipulative people. It's terrible. I have to admit.
Yeah. Producer Zach, make sure you clip that one. We need to clip that. Dr. Chloe, the most manipulative, that might actually be the YouTube title.
No, Zach, clip it and cut it.
Dr. Chloe, the most manipulative clinical psychologist. No, I'm just teasing.
My clients how to manipulate people too to get what they want. So
absolutely. So do you have your radars, your antennas up, and you can tell when people are kind of not being genuine or authentic with you, or are you human? Does it take you just as long as someone else, or are you able to pretty much pick up on things?
That's such a good question. I mean, I think anyone who thinks that they know everything has obviously, like, it's more like they just have a lack of self-awareness about what they don't know, more than likely. That's just what I personally think. So yeah, I mean, I'm definitely more on the human side, and I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm pretty high on agreeableness, so much so that I think maybe that's why I've actually, in my much, much younger years, like decades ago, and I talk about this a little bit in both of my books, the dating book and the anxiety book, in my much younger years, I actually would get into codependent relationships, like where I would be almost like kind of taken advantage of and manipulated myself. So I was kind of joking about like how like I, manipulate people or something. It's not really what I do. I'm just saying
Right.
Like in an argument with my husband, I can just like we all can get a little neurotic sometimes. But really, I think if anything, I'm pretty high on agreeableness, and I tend to take people at face value, so much so to the point where I've had to learn to actually have pretty good, strong boundaries with people.
Mm-hmm. Well, last week, we had on Jennifer Say, the former president of Levi's Brands, and she got into some hot water with things she said coming out, saying schools should be open, public schools should be open during the lockdowns. You've also written about the Twitter files and the dump of information about the Twitter files, and bringing all that into, you've been a pretty big proponent of free speech, not necessarily from the First Amendment or a political standpoint, though we could get into that, but free speech from a mental standpoint, free speech from a psychological standpoint. Explain to us a little bit about how having free speech, not necessarily the constitutional definition of free speech, but just having free speech, exchange of ideas, knowing what the other person thinks, can help our mental state as well.
Yeah. So there's a few main reasons why, as a psychologist, I'm really in favor of talking things out, right? Like, I think most people who are in the psychology field recognize the benefits of being able to take what's inside and put it into words and to share yourself, right? So, in fact, evolutionary psychologists have speculated that one of the reasons that our human society has grown to be so sophisticated is because we do have the gift of language. That's one of the ways that we can exchange ideas and develop ideas and even discard unhealthy or maladaptive ideas. You know, we've all had the experience, myself included, many times, of saying something and then only hearing myself say it aloud, realizing, you know what, that's really not quite right. That doesn't sound quite right. And we need to be able to have supportive sounding boards and places where we can talk things through. Also, in terms of like safe spaces, I do think that it's better for people to be able to say what's really on their mind. For example, for me as a woman, if somebody thinks that, you know, women are stupid or whatever, I actually don't want to squash the right of the person to say that. I feel more safe knowing how people really feel. And then when I know how they really feel, I can choose whether or not I want to be around them. I think that's an important thing to note, that just because we have free speech doesn't mean that we have to lend our ears to anybody, anywhere, anytime. But to try to stop the right of people to express themselves, I think is a whole other issue.
And it would seem like people could be very they could get more upset and angry if they're not allowed to say something, which I imagine could lead to them, you know, being a mental wreck, for a lack of a better phrase. Remember, I didn't go to Columbia.
Yeah. So I think you're right. So when we can express ourselves and we can put things into words, studies have shown over and over again that actually increases our sense of control, right? And it has been shown to slow the amygdala response. The amygdala is the part of the brain that can become very reactive and, you know, go into that fight or flight space very quickly. When we put into words, you know, what's bothering us, like, well, such and such, you know, group of people has made me nervous because of my thoughts and beliefs about A, B, and C, right? That's the kind of statement that these days can make people very uncomfortable. Whereas the truth is that by being able to say and discuss these things, it actually gets it out of that space where it's short-circuiting the frontal lobe of the brain. And it's much easier then for us to identify and stop and think about what we're saying, as well as to get social feedback on it. And if we just keep it inside, we have this whole neural circuitry that's going ballistic, often in ways that don't even make sense, and we're getting more emotional and feeling less in control than if we're able to actually talk it out.
Excellent. Well, you were a yoga instructor. Are you still a yoga instructor? Do you still do classes for yoga?
Well, so we have to remember that with yoga, there's the physical postures, and then there's also the breathing and the meditation parts. Like, those are all part of yoga. So I don't currently teach the physical postures as much, and I honestly don't really even do them as much as I wish I did. I do sometimes, but quite regularly I do. I speak for a lot of organizations, and I teach them a lot about breath work and meditation and how that can connect with goal attainment and self-regulation and all those types of things.
Very cool. Very cool. And I mentioned a couple of times Ivy League education. I'm absolutely astounded by people that go to school for anything, but go to a higher level, get their doctorate. Awesome stuff that you've done. Awesome work, but it didn't appear that you would be somebody that would be Ivy League educated to get a doctorate. You dropped out of school. You dropped out of high school. And then you actually went back later in life, which most people probably listening to this or watching this would not have thought that. Like, that's an unusual story. So it's not that you were this elite student you did everything right as a teenager. You did everything right as a young adult, and it's been rainbows and butterflies for you. But most people wouldn't think that.
No, no, definitely not. And that's one of the things I unpack a little bit in my book, Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety, is the path that I followed and really kind of how I used some of those techniques on myself. And it's also why I think with my dating book, that book, as I said, is somewhat about boundaries and about pursuit and relationship dynamics, because since I did have a really kind of difficult start in life, it was hard for me when it came, to dating and like trying to kind of explain to people like, well, here's how I was when I was 18, like it was a little hard and a little different. But I mean, I at the same time, and I didn't really share the story of my background until I had, my several books published and my PhD and all of that kind of stuff, because I didn't want people to kind of associate or assume or stereotype me. But then I actually started to realize that people were stereotyping me as like this, girl who had this really easy life. And they were like, oh, well, she just goes on TV and has her doctorate and writes her books, and she can't understand like real problems from real people. And that's when I was like, okay, wait a minute, I have to like really let people know that that's not the case.
Which is actually a very good lesson for life, because we do that. We stereotype, we put people in boxes, we label people without actually getting to know them, without knowing where they're coming from. We don't walk a mile in people's shoes. We don't see their point of view or perspective.
Right, right. And, people are complex, and our identity can change over time, which, kind of back to the free speech thing is one of the things that I think is really helpful for people to understand, that being able to talk your way through things and have your ideas evolve and change over time is actually a good thing. And so that's another reason why I'm so opposed to this whole cancel culture thing. Like where, if you say the wrong thing in one moment, or you said the wrong thing 10 years ago or whatever, then we like pounce on you. Because the truth is that we're supposed to be growing. We're supposed to be learning and evolving and changing. And if that is happening, then by definition, we should look back on our past selves and say, well, I was kind of off the mark there. And we have to give ourselves space to do that.
Yeah, we don't do that. We know where we're at right now, and maybe I don't give Chloe leeway or grace. She's not where I am right now, but I was where she was at a while ago, and I forget that. Or my problems or my problems aren't the same as hers, but I think that, well, your issues, what you're doing, your screw ups are a lot worse than my screw ups. It's almost like we turn a blind eye to what I'm doing wrong and just point out what you're doing wrong, and we don't see the whole picture.
Yes, for many people, it's an interesting thing. Some people have a tendency to only see the flaws in themselves, and they have a skewed social comparison that way. Other people have a tendency the opposite direction, where they only see the flaws in others. And honestly, it can even change by domain, right? So we might feel really good about ourselves in one area, but not in the other. So that's another thing I do like about free speech, is that by talking things through, it increases our self-awareness. If we can't talk things through, it's hard to develop self-awareness. So for those educators and coaches, I just think it's so important that we create a space where the people we're trying to teach or coach really feel like they can say anything to us.
Well, she's Dr. Chloe Carmichael. Her newest book is Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety. You can follow her on Instagram, on Twitter, at Dr. Chloe _. That's at Dr. Chloe _. You can also visit her website, all kinds of things there. If you're an amateur psychologist, which all of us coaches try to be, we try to act like we're an amateur psychologist. If you're a real psychologist, there's resources, all kinds of resources at drchloe.com. Parting shots, parting thoughts you want to leave our audience with as we go out into the world. Some great insights you've already shared with us, but give us a little one or two thoughts or insights to kickstart the rest of our day.
Yeah, I would just want people again to know that the healthy function of anxiety is to stimulate preparation behaviors. So when you feel like some anxiety creeping up, we don't want to necessarily just try to, bliss it away or tell ourselves to not think about it. Instead, ask yourself, what could this anxiety be stimulating me to do? What action step could it be stimulating me to take?
Well, awesome. Well, we appreciate everybody watching us on the Success is a Choice Podcasting Network, wherever you're getting this audio or your video. We appreciate it. If you would kindly smash or tap that little like or the subscribe button, share this episode. We all have brains. And so the stuff that Dr. Chloe had for us today is valuable to all of us. So share this episode. But until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?